Hey guys, welcome to Nala Knows. Today's book review is on Sula by Toni Morrison. If you didn't know, she's an African American writer who's written plenty of books. Majority of them are kind of like depressing. They're like set back in like the early 1900s during like the Jim Crow days type thing. Sula specifically is about two young girls, one named Nell, one named Sula, and how they both grew up in the same small town, but different paths. Like Nell, she grew up to be married with kids, lived a domestic life. Sula went off to college and went to the big city, became fancy, came back to their small town, and then it shows like the difference of their lives there. Um, this was actually a good read. It was intriguing. It kept me interested. Unlike some of her other books, they have like a slow start. And I've experienced this with other Toni Morrison books. Like, you'll read the first couple of pages and you'll be like, what does this mean? Where is this going? I don't even know. And then you start getting into it, and it's like, okay, that makes sense. So this is how this one started, as usual, as all of her books. But one thing I would say is that it's entitled Sula, but it's really about Nell as well. Like, the back even says like it's about two girls. One goes to college, becomes a rebel. One has decided to stay where she was raised and was born and chose to marry. But it's only about Sula. I mean, it features both characters, Nell and Sula, but it's like a 55/45 type of thing. It's not even like all Sula, no Nell, because at the end of the book, Sula dies and the rest is like about Nell for like the last like 5 pages. Um but this one, as a lot of like Toni Morrison's work, it has like a lot of things that like stood out to me. Um, so I'm gonna read some things that like stood out, like a lot of things that reminded me of like life. Like some things resonated when I started reading it. So I don't know what chapter this is, but it's like in the middle of the book, probably part two, because it comes in a part one and a part two. Part one is when they're kids and all their, adolescent experiences, and then part two is when they grow up and Nell gets married. Sula comes back to Medallion 10 years later, and they kind of, I wouldn't say rekindle their friendship, but because Sula ends up sleeping with Nell's man, and you just like, dang, son. Okay. So this part in the book, I'm just going to read what I underlined. And it says, the first experience taught her there was no other that you could count on. The second, that there was no self to count on either. And that basically comes from the excerpt where they're talking about Sula's mother, and then Eva, Sula's grandmother. Like, they're all kind of like eccentric, independent women, like never married. And she's just basically talking about how, in Sula's experience, that there's literally like no one that you can really count on in life because her mother and her grandmother weren't all that reliable. And then it says the second, that there was no self to count on either. Like, sometimes you can't even trust your own self, even though sometimes you is all you have, but you're reliable as well, because who's perfect? Another part that I did like was, oh yeah, this is part where so when Sula grows up, she is kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Starts with a P. Promiscuous. She's kind of promiscuous, and I mean, that's all she knows from her mother and her grandmother. And She has sex with this guy named Ajax, who's like a childhood friend, and there's like no strings attached. But then Sula starts falling for him and catching feelings. And then the part I underlined was he dragged her under him and made love to her with the steadiness and the intensity of a man about to leave for dating. So since they have like no strings attached type of sex, Sula starts catching feelings. I guess she's stigmatized or whatever. And Ajax has sex with her for one last time because he can tell that she's catching feelings. Um, so I don't know. That kind of resonated with me. I kind of was like, I've been there, done that type of thing. Um, what else? Toni Morrison's writing is like very beautiful. Like, if you're not really poetic or like you don't know how to read in between the lines, I don't think that you're gonna understand her writing because a lot of her works, I just be looking at it like, for what? Like, why would you even write that like that? And then other times it's just like, that's lit. I get it. So a lot of her reading, I have to read over twice because I'm not saying it's up for interpretation, but when you read a poem, you feel it how you feel it, regardless of how the writer wrote it. And though even though it's not a poem, it's still poetic. So you just feel it how you feel it. And then there's a part that reads, I didn't even know his name. And if I didn't know his name, then there is nothing I did know. And I have known nothing ever at all since the one thing I wanted was to know his name. So how could he help but leave me since he was making love to a woman who didn't even know his name? Blah, blah, blah. It's just as well he left. Soon as I would have torn the flesh from his face just to see if I was right about the gold, and nobody would have understood that kind of curiosity. They would have believed that I wanted to hurt him, just like the little boy who fell down the steps and broke his leg. And people think I pushed him just because I looked at it. There aren't any more new songs, and I have sung all the ones there are. I have sung them all. I have sung all the songs there are. And that's just basically her alluding to, she basically slept with all the men in town. And the one man, Ajax, who said he was going to dating, who made love to her with intensity as a man going to dating, that was basically the guy. She thought Ajax was his real name, and that's not even his real name, so that's why she said that. So she feels kind of like hurt because how would you feel if you had sex with a dude and he told you his name was DJ this whole time, but that's what his mother calls him, his brother calls him. You would have thought that on his birth certificate, DJ is his real name. Kind of find out his name is Derek Jr. You would just feel like you wouldn't even know him. So that's basically what she's saying. So, I mean, it's a lot of, oh, hold on, I got another page. And then another piece that I resonated with is so when Sula comes back to town and she talks to Nell, um, Sula sleeps with Nell's husband, and there's like no emotional attachment to it for Sula. It's just, I just want to see what that was about. So, boom, I'm going to do it. And so then they're having a dialogue about, like, why would you do that? Blah, 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 blah. And Nelly's basically telling Sula, like, what have you got to show for your life? You're lonely. You still don't know anything. Sula's like, you think I don't know what your life is like just because I'm not living it? I know what every colored woman in this country is doing. And Sula says, Nell calls Sula lonely because she got to steal everybody's man. Sula says, this is the part that I underline. Sula says, yes, I'm lonely, but my lonely is mine. Now you're lonely because her husband's gone. Now you're lonely is somebody else's, made by somebody else and handed to you. Ain't that something? A secondhand lonely. And I read that and I was like, ooh, ain't that the truth? Because if I'm going to be alone, I'd rather make that choice. Like, all right, boom, I'm Mother Teresa. Like I'm just making that choice rather than, okay, my man left me and my 3 kids. That's a lonely that you didn't choose. So, and then it goes on to say, is that what I'm supposed to do? Spend my life keeping a man? And Nelly says, they worth keeping, Sula. And then Sula says, they ain't worth more than me.